increasing the circulation. She's claiming that, yes, Ireland is being forced to assume further debt by the IMF. But in the case of the Federal Reserve, she's just saying that the Federal Reserve is, quote, putting some more currency out there, unquote. Well, if you're even the most neophitical student of the issues at hand here, how does the Federal Reserve just put some money out there? Does it give it away? No, in truth, it buys federal bonds, which creates debt. So the Federal Reserve is creating debt also, which I've explained for so many years. It's preposterous that a plagiarist, somehow it just escapes them still that this makes any sense. Now, why, nonetheless, in both cases, in the case of Ireland and in the case of the United States, is more money, quote, being put into circulation, unquote? Well, it's not being put into circulation at all. It's being loaned into circulation as a debt subject to interest, and it's this obfuscation of our own promissory obligations to each other, which is multiplying artificial indebtedness in proportion to the circulation and causing all the problems that we experience, okay? So the damage of the Federal Reserve is the same as the damage of the IMF in Ireland. There's no difference. It's interest. Any rate of interest which has to be reborrowed in order to maintain a circulation, a vital circulation. And we can't even continue servicing even the initial sum of debt from day one of such a system unless we maintain a vital circulation, and we can only do that by reborrowing principal and interest paid out of the general circulation as a new sum of debt, perpetually increased so much as periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt, until at an ever escalating rate we succumb to terminal failure. But no, the Federal Reserve is not just putting money into circulation, nor is there any difference in the circumstance of Ireland as opposed to the United States in terms of quantitative easing. Why do we have to have quantitative easing? Further borrowing on the behalf of Ireland, United States, every country of the world, subject to a central banking system. Why? Because in the terminal phases of the system, the creditworthiness of the people is inherently exceeded to the point where we are no longer capable of borrowing further to maintain a vital circulation. This is why we are assuming what are called, quote, bad debts, unquote. They're debts beyond beyond already terminal sums of debt, already beyond our creditworthiness to sustain a vital circulation by further borrowing. So that's why we have this quantitative easing. That's why it isn't a solution. That's why it only contributes further to the problem. And Ellen Hodgson Brown has just illustrated her inability to understand these problems. The fact that she's not an authority on these issues at all, certainly not an original authority, although she'll hear this and she'll revise her explanation to comply. You mark my words, you know. But she's not an authority, and she's just registered that fact by her preposterous notion that the Federal Reserve is, quote, just putting money into circulation, unquote. Absolutely ludicrous.
What you have to understand is that all of our money is generated as debt. And when private debt collapses, public debt must expand in order to maintain a constant money supply. And that is one of the mandates of the Federal Reserve. But we can't increase our debt anymore. Our debt has increased by 50% in the last 4 years. And the total paid in interest has stayed the same, and the reason is that interest rates were pushed to ridiculously low levels, and that's what's caused the carry trade and many bad things.
Here we go with preposterous pretended authority. This is how we know absolutely that Ellen Hodgson Brown is nothing but a plagiarist. You can't have it both ways, Ellen. Absolutely not. Interest rates were pushed to ridiculously low levels. You know, recently you've been advocating that money can't be subject to interest, that it has to be spent into circulation. You haven't offered us an explanation why. And assumably, the reason you can't even articulate the reason why, which is my proof that the banking system has no rightful claim whatever to interest. It merely publishes evidence of our promissory obligations to each other, is that you know full well you'd be plagiarizing me if you did. Nonetheless, here you are, claiming that lowering interest rates to above zero is somehow ridiculous. How can this possibly be that you've morphed your solution from first claiming there was no problem with interest to eventually, presently, claiming that money has to be spent into circulation free of interest? How can this possibly be? You don't offer us a principle why. And yet here you are, mistakenly at the same time offering the conflicting proposition that interest rates were somehow lowered to some ridiculously low rate. How can it be ridiculous? Since when do the banks, who didn't even give up any lawful consideration in merely publishing evidence of our promissory obligations to each other, how can any rate of interest be justified when, for instance, to issue $100,000 of currency into circulation, it might cost them $2 to merely publish evidence of our promissory obligations to each other? That's when they collect $100,000 in principal. Do the math, Ellen. How many times have they multiplied their profit without any interest whatsoever by laundering the principal into their possession? And then you say some rate of interest which is above zero is nonetheless ridiculous, when any rate of interest whatsoever which multiplies artificial indebtedness because we have to borrow that interest back into circulation as a new debt above the former sum of debt, when that process inevitably multiplies artificial indebtedness into terminal indebtedness, you say that that's ridiculously low? My God.
But if you could finance your debt interest-free,
then you have the gall to immediately flip-flop to the opposite extreme, pretending to be an advocate of issuing currency without interest, even as if you were an original author of the idea, when just 2 years ago you were arguing vehemently against me, asserting that you didn't even see that interest is a problem, and now you're pretending to be an author of solution. Moments after saying that interest rates were ridiculously low, and now advocating no interest whatsoever.
By going through your own central bank, which is what quantitative easing is, or what QE2 is. QE1, I agree, was a bad idea. I mean, it only served the banks. But QE2 actually helps us because it allows us to fund our deficit, which is a budget that the Congress has already set. I mean, they're going to issue those bonds, whether the Federal Reserve buys them or somebody else buys them. But if the Federal Reserve buys them, then the interest is rebated to the government, and it's effectively funding our debt interest-free. And I would say Ireland could do the same thing if they set up their own central bank. I mean, if they had a publicly owned bank that would pursue this alternative.
Oh, sure. And charging ourselves interest and then giving it back to ourselves makes a lot of sense as well, even if you can't possibly cite a principle by which we should do so. Across the rest of this preposterous interview, she attempts to establish multivarious ways in which ostensibly a proper circulation is maintained, all of which propositions are accomplished perfectly, efficiently, and even without regulation or bureaucracy, simply by the obligatory schedule of payment of mathematically perfected economy, something which existed as a proof of singular solution practically 40 years before Ellen Hodgson Brown even decided that she was a worthy authority. So, nonetheless, there you have it. Thanks to Max Kaiser, you've done the world a great service, particularly by denying me an opportunity to interview in response to this, Max. But no matter. All this will shake out, and people like you will find their rightful place in this world, as hopefully I will as well. Thanks very much for listening. It's always an honor to be heard on perhaps the most vital matter of our time.
Mental slavery, no, but ourselves can free our minds, and yet have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop all the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? And some say it's just a part of it. We all got to fulfill the book. So won't you help to sing? Songs of freedom is all I ever had. Redemption songs, these songs of freedom.